Some stories of betrayal hit harder when they come from strangers, but the ones that leave scars deeper than bone are always the ones written in your own blood. My name is Monica. I am 28 years old, and what happened last Sunday shattered the last illusion I had about family. For years, my relationship with my mother had been a quiet battleground, paved with cold shoulders, guilt-laced silences, and passive-aggressive sabotage disguised as concern. But I never imagined she would go this far. I never imagined she would humiliate me in front of the people who were supposed to be mine too. She thought she could cast me aside like I was never her daughter, but I made sure she would never forget the day she tried. It started with a chime on my phone, just a harmless little notification from a group chat labeled Family Dinner Sunday. My stomach tightened the moment I saw it. I had been removed from that group 3 weeks ago when my mother said she was decluttering the family chats, as if her daughter was spam to be filtered out. But somehow the system glitched, or she forgot I could still see preview notifications. And that was when I saw the message. Hi everyone! Special family feast at my house this Sunday. Looking forward to seeing all my closest people there. My thumb froze above the screen. Closest people? That phrase burned like acid down my throat. I typed back without even thinking. I said I would absolutely be there. I said I would bring dessert. I even added a smiley face, as if that would smooth the edge I felt slicing through me. Then came her message. Not in the group. No. She had to twist the knife in private. Her words were cold, sharp, and simple. This is an event only for close people, Monica. Please do not come. I stared at the screen, and my vision blurred, but not from tears, from rage. My own mother had looked at a list of people she loved and decided her daughter did not belong on it. Not only did she plan a celebration without me, she had the audacity to tell me I was not close enough to be part of it. Like I was an afterthought. Like I was a mistake she regretted keeping. Yes, our relationship was rocky. We had fought. She never supported me the way she did my brothers, never congratulated me on my promotions, always made backhanded comments about my clothes, my weight, my choices. But I thought there was a line she would not cross. I was wrong. And the realization cracked something inside of me. She wanted me out of her life. She was about to get a version of me she would never be able to erase. I waited until Sunday afternoon. I dressed in clean, simple black, a color that neither blended nor apologized. I drove to her house in Durham, North Carolina, where the cherry trees in the front yard were already shedding blossoms like confetti on the pavement. As I approached the house, I could hear laughter, glasses clinking, the familiar echoes of family gatherings I used to be part of. The porch was lined with shoes. I did not hesitate. I opened the door and stepped inside. Everything stopped. Her face turned gray when she saw me. My aunts went silent, forks hovered above plates, and my cousins stared like they were watching a soap opera unfold in real time. She rushed forward and hissed words that only made my blood roar louder. Words about how I did not belong, about how I was ruining her day, about how this was not the place for people like me. But I did not flinch. I walked right past her, the wooden floorboards creaking beneath my heels like thunder. I found a seat at the end of the long dining table, right across from the framed photos of family vacations I had never been invited to. She froze, and then slowly, she retreated to her seat. It was clear she was trying to keep face in front of the others. She did not want a scene. That was her thing, control. But I knew her too well. I knew she would never let this go quietly. The dinner resumed, awkwardly. Conversations tried to restart. Laughter sounded strained. But it was like everyone was waiting for the storm to hit. I did not eat. I sat still and watched. I counted how many bites my cousin Lydia took, how many times my Uncle Peter checked his phone, and then, like clockwork, it happened. She turned toward me, her wine glass in hand, and said something that sounded sweet to everyone else, but was laced with poison meant for me. It was a remark about how some people only show up when they are not wanted. The room tensed. I felt my breath slow. And then I stood. I did not speak. Not at first. I reached forward and grabbed the edge of the white tablecloth, floral embroidered and ironed to perfection. I pulled. One long, deliberate tug. Chaos. The entire feast, turkey, mashed potatoes, cranberry salad, wine glasses, candles, centerpieces, crashed to the floor in a screaming mess of shattered porcelain and gravy-soaked linen. Plates broke, soup splashed onto velvet dresses, shrimp cocktail clung to my cousin Jason's lapel like a badge of war. Screams rang out. Someone gasped. And then my mother stood, her mouth trembling in rage, but I raised my voice louder. I told her I was tired. Tired of being the scapegoat, the disappointment, the invisible one. I told her she never showed me love unless there was an audience. I reminded her of every missed birthday, every time she told me I was not enough, every cruel nickname, every time she pretended I was not her daughter in front of her friends. I told her she would never get the satisfaction of pretending she was a good mother, not when she excluded me from her idea of close people. I told her that no daughter should have to beg to be seen. I told her she would choke on the silence I left behind. Then I looked at everyone else, the same people who had watched for years. I told them I did not wish any of them harm, but I hoped none of them ever had to feel what it was like to be erased by your own mother. I said I did not wish anyone a mother like her. And then I turned around and walked out. I did not look back. As I closed the door behind me, I heard nothing but my own footsteps. But later, I would hear that my mother stood there for minutes, frozen in place, her hand on her chest, clutching the empty space where her version of motherhood used to live. She wanted a feast without me. She got a reckoning instead. Update 1. When I got back to my apartment in Charlotte that evening, I thought the silence would bring me some kind of peace, the kind of silence that follows a storm, thick and heavy but oddly satisfying. My hands were still trembling a little from the adrenaline, but inside, I felt clearer than I had in years. For the first time in my adult life, I had finally said everything I had been swallowing for decades. I had walked into the lion's den, stared down the queen of manipulation, and flipped her perfect little table of lies. I knew the aftermath would be ugly, but I was ready for it. It did not take long. My phone lit up before I even kicked off my shoes. The first call came from my Aunt Deborah. She had always played both sides, smiling at me in private and whispering about me in group chats. Her voice blasted through the speaker the moment I answered. She did not ask how I was. She did not ask why I did it. She screamed. She screamed about disrespect, about humiliation, about how I had shamed the entire family in front of neighbors and cousins who had flown in from out of state. I let her rant for 3 seconds before I hung up. I had no space left in my life for people who only showed up when it was convenient to scold me. I blocked her number without hesitation. Next came Cousin Martin, who used to steal my Halloween candy and then cry to my mother that I hid him. He called me selfish, ungrateful, toxic. I let him spill his rehearsed outrage and then hit the block button with the same satisfaction as slamming a door. Then came another cousin, then an uncle, then 2 more numbers I did not recognize. But I knew they were from the family group chat. They all had something to say. They all wanted to scold me, to remind me that no matter what my mother had done, I should never have raised my voice to her. Never should have disrespected her in front of everyone. Never should have acted like a lunatic. That word kept coming up. Lunatic. As if my outrage had no roots. As if years of being excluded, belittled, mocked, erased, dismissed, and treated like a stranger in my own bloodline meant nothing. As if I was crazy for not wanting to sit silently and pretend everything was fine while being served bitterness disguised as mashed potatoes. Every single call that came through was another voice demanding my obedience. Another reminder that in this family, I was always expected to swallow my pain to keep the performance going. But I was done being the quiet one. I was done being the uninvited daughter with a plastic smile. So I made a decision. I went through my contacts one by one and deleted anyone who had ever raised their voice at me but stayed silent when my mother humiliated me in front of others. I removed them from my social media, blocked their numbers, and wrote down their names on a torn envelope just to remind myself who had revealed their true colors when the storm hit. The list grew longer than I expected. Then came the final blow, an old voicemail from my brother. He did not even bother calling live. He sent a recording dripping with disappointment where he said I had crossed the line and hurt our mother so deeply that she might never recover. He talked about how our family might never look at me the same way again, as if that was a threat, as if I had not spent my whole life watching that same family look through me like I was made of glass. I listened to the whole message in silence, and then deleted it. No tears, no anger, just relief. Relief that I no longer had to fight for space at a table that was never meant to feed me. By the time midnight rolled around, my phone was silent again. The kind of silence I had wanted earlier, only now it was deeper, more permanent. The pressure to respond, to defend, to explain had vanished. I had given them all a choice. They chose to protect the image of a woman who had spent years slicing into me with backhanded compliments and carefully engineered rejections. They chose her because she was louder, older, and more manipulative, and I chose myself. Word traveled fast, apparently. By the next morning, I heard through a neutral cousin, one of the few I had not blocked yet, that people were still reeling from what I had done. My mother had cried in the living room after I left. She had collapsed onto the armrest of the couch, clutching her chest like a southern drama queen, moaning that she never thought I would turn on her like that. Relatives hovered around her, patting her shoulder and offering her sweet tea and sympathy. But beneath the hand-wringing and shock, there was something else festering. Fear. Fear that I would expose more. Fear that I had finally broken the spell. I had shattered the illusion of the perfect family feast and reminded them all that what they were really dining on was denial served on crystal plates. They did not expect me to stand up. They expected me to apologize. They expected me to grovel for forgiveness like I always had, to play the role of the prodigal daughter crawling back for scraps. But I gave them something else. I gave them silence. I gave them absence, and it stunned them more than anything I could have said. In their minds, I was supposed to be ashamed. Instead, I was free. Free from their performances, their conditional love, their whispered judgments behind closed doors. And that freedom tasted better than any meal they ever served. They were all shocked. Shocked that the girl they used to dismiss had finally learned how to burn the script. Shocked that the quiet one knew how to set a table on fire without even flinching. Shocked that the daughter who was never considered close had finally made her distance known in a way they would never forget. Update 2. It had been 4 days since the feast. 4 days of silence from most of the family, except for the barrage I had already shut down. 4 days where I breathed a little easier, moved a little freer, felt a little more like someone who had finally taken her life back. The apartment was calm again, the only sound coming from the slow hum of my window fan and the occasional screech of tires outside on the street below. I had expected a few more attempts to guilt me, maybe a long-winded email from a cousin or a letter pretending to be concerned but dripping with accusation. What I did not expect was a knock at my door late Friday afternoon, and I definitely did not expect it to be her, Aunt Valerie, my mother's younger sister. Always a step removed from the chaos, always watching from the sidelines. She was the only one who had never raised her voice at me, the only one who never joined the performances. She stood at my door with a plastic container of peach cobbler and a look that told me she had been rehearsing what to say since the night had happened. I let her in, not because I wanted to talk, but because she had earned enough neutrality to be heard. At least once. She placed the cobbler on the table without a word, and for a moment I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. It felt like a peace offering from a war that never had a treaty. But I didn't touch it. I sat, and she sat across from me. She started slow. Her voice wasn't demanding like the others. There was no fire, no thunder, just that quiet cadence of someone who had learned to observe first and speak later. She told me she had seen it coming, that it was years in the making, that she knew how my mother treated me, that she had noticed the differences in the way I was spoken to, the way I was left out, the way my achievements were never mentioned, while others were praised for doing the bare minimum. She listed the times I had been left out of photos, forgotten in invitations, blamed when things went wrong. She remembered the way my mother turned my college graduation into a complaint about parking, the way she called my apartment temporary, and the way she made it clear that I was never the kind of daughter she had wanted. It was a strange thing, hearing someone else say it all out loud. I had repeated those things in my mind for years, sometimes questioning if I had imagined them, if I had been too sensitive, if I had made it worse than it was. But hearing it from Valerie made it real in a way that scraped old wounds raw again. And then, just as I felt the knot in my chest start to loosen, she pivoted. She said my mother was in pain now, that she was not eating, that she sat on the porch every evening and stared out at the yard, not speaking to anyone, that she kept replaying what I had said in her head and repeating it to anyone who would listen, each time with more disbelief. Valerie said she believed I was right to say what I said, but she hoped I would consider taking the first step toward reconciliation. That even though I had every right to be angry, this rift was tearing the family apart. She said that people were divided now, that some were beginning to see things differently, that maybe, just maybe, this could be the moment where healing started. That was where she lost me. Because healing does not start with guilt. It does not start with someone showing up with dessert and a plea for silence. Healing does not begin with covering up the cracks in the wall with another coat of denial. Healing begins with accountability. And no one, not one single person from that table, had shown any signs of it. I sat still as she spoke, not interrupting, not reacting, but my hands were folded tighter now, fingers white at the knuckles. I let her finish her plea, let her deliver her well-meaning sermon about family unity, and when she finally fell quiet, I met her gaze and told her the truth. I was done. Done pretending that pain was worth preserving for the sake of appearances. Done patching over wounds that my mother had no interest in acknowledging. Done trying to bridge a gap that only I had ever been willing to cross. I told her I appreciated her kindness, her words, her acknowledgement of the truth. But reconciliation was not going to happen. Not now. Not ever. She looked stunned for a moment, like she had not expected me to be so final. Like she had prepared for a fight, but not for complete indifference. but I had nothing left to give to that situation. I had already spilled everything on the floor of my mother's dining room, along with her perfectly arranged dishes and hand-cut fruit trays. There was no version of this story where I crawled back for acceptance. No ending where I forgot the years of being told I was too much, too cold, too distant, too difficult. Because I was not the problem. I was the proof that there had been a problem all along. Aunt Valerie nodded, quietly. She stood up, left the cobbler on the table, and walked out without asking for a hug or a promise or even another conversation. And that was how it ended. She came for peace. But I was no longer interested in peace built on silence. And when she left, she understood that. Update 3. There comes a point when silence is no longer enough. When ignoring the calls, deleting the voicemails, blocking the numbers becomes a mask instead of a solution. I had already walked away emotionally, cut off the toxic branches that grew from a family tree, more rotten than I dared admit to myself for years. But I still carried their name. I still signed it on forms, still saw it on my license, my lease, my medical records, still felt its weight every time I introduced myself. I was branded by the very people who made me feel like a burden, and I had reached the point where that name burned on my tongue like ash. So I changed it. I filed the paperwork 2 weeks after my aunt's visit. I picked a name that felt clean, a name I could say without remembering every time my mother used mine like a weapon. I stood in front of a clerk at the Mecklenburg County Courthouse, signed the forms, and swore under oath that I was changing it not to escape debt or commit fraud, but to cut ties with the people who had done far worse than any crime. And when the approval came through, when I saw the new name typed on official documents, I felt something shift deep inside me. Not relief, not joy, something harder, something sharper, liberation. I kept it quiet. I told no one. I deleted the remnants of my old identity from public profiles, untagged myself from photos, reset passwords, and rerouted mail. I did not stage a dramatic announcement. I did not owe them one. But families like mine always find out. It was my uncle who told her. He worked in a county office and saw the paperwork come through. It took less than 24 hours for my mother to call. She used a number I did not recognize, a local Charlotte area code that slipped through my filters. When I answered, there was no pause, no greeting, just a voice already half shouting, half crying, asking what I had done, demanding to know if I had lost my mind, how I could humiliate her like that, how I could destroy the family name over some petty grudge. I stood in the middle of my empty kitchen, holding the phone like it was made of fire. I let her scream, let her rage, let her pour every ounce of entitlement and wounded pride through the line like it still meant something. She spoke as if I was still hers to control, as if I had not been drifting from her since I was old enough to notice the way her eyes narrowed when I succeeded, as if a name, just 5 letters on a page, was more sacred than the way she had erased me from her life every time I refused to play the obedient daughter. And then I spoke. Calm, steady, absolute. I told her this was our last conversation, that I had nothing more to say, that she would never hear from me again. I told her I was moving to another city, one she would never know, that she would never see me again, that there would be no more birthdays, no more holidays, no more late-night guilt calls masked as concern. I told her this was the end, and this time it would not be undone. It was not a threat. It was a conclusion. She tried to respond, but I hung up before she could. I deleted the number, blocked it, and threw the phone into a drawer. I did not cry. I did not scream. I made a cup of tea and watched the sun fall behind the skyline, feeling the kind of quiet that used to feel like loneliness but now felt like armor. Word spread quickly again. My cousin sent an email begging me to reconsider. An uncle sent a message calling it extreme. A former family friend wrote to say I should not make decisions I would regret. But none of it touched me. None of it meant anything. I had walked through the fire of their judgment and come out on the other side with nothing left to burn. I left Charlotte 2 weeks later. I did not tell anyone where I was going. I left no forwarding address. I deleted the last of my accounts, closed the bank accounts that bore my old name, canceled the lease, and packed my life into a single moving van. I drove away without looking in the rearview mirror. I moved into a small apartment in a city I had never lived in before, one with clean streets and quiet neighbors, and no shared memories. I signed a new lease with my new name, started a new job under it, opened a new chapter, sealed off from everything that had come before. My mother will never know where I went. She will never knock on my door, never find me through relatives, never see me again. And that is not a tragedy. It is a boundary, one she taught me to build every time she tore me down. She raised her voice for the last time. I walked away for the last time, and for once the story ended not with forgiveness, not with healing, but with freedom. The kind that comes when you stop begging for love that was never real and start building a life that finally is.